Hi guys, it's Kirsty here from Kirsty TV with the Truth Teller series. We're going to be going live tonight with my beautiful guest, Rena Romano. Hey there. Thank you for being here. So
Glad to be here.
I'm glad too. This is going to be an amazing conversation. So everybody is well aware by now, unless you've been living under a rock, what's been going on with the MeToo campaign that was started by Alyssa Milano around the whole Weinstein situation with actresses. So a lot of people coming out, a lot of truth tellers at the moment that we're seeing in this space around sexual harassment in the workplace, around sexual abuse, rape, trauma. And so my guest tonight, Rena, your story really began, you were only 4 years old when your older brother began molesting you. So you are a thriver, you call it, of incest. And then in your 20s, there was a rape with a colleague and there was sexual harassment by your boss. So you didn't feel comfortable being able to have that conversation. So I think it's sad that you've had to go through all of it, but in terms of a guest, you're someone who has really crossed all of the spectrums. So you can certainly have that empathy for anyone who's listening tonight.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And I love to have the conversation. I want to be a voice for those who have not found theirs yet.
Oh, I love that. That's a beautiful line. She wants to be a voice for people who have not found theirs yet. So if you're just tuning in, how this works is you can post comments that we can see. Every now and then I'll stop and the conversation, have a look at them, talk through some of them. So please engage with us. Let us know what's resonating with you and go like, hell yes, and I'm there. Or, use the hashtag #MeToo if you've been through this and you feel comfortable sharing that. Share the video on your page now so that other people can tune in live while we're having this conversation. I'm going to get things wrong sometimes, when we're not about PC here. This is a safe space for us to have this conversation and not worry about what we're saying and if it's said in the right way, and same for you in terms of comments. So say whatever you feel comfortable saying, share what you want to share, ask questions as we go along, and that will make it such a more fun and engaging conversation for all of us. So Rena, start at the beginning. Share a little bit about what went on in your childhood. When I think about 4-year-olds and my beautiful nieces, to be touched in that way and to have a sexual experience when you have no idea what it is, what was that experience like? Do you even recall how it felt in your body at that younger age, or did you shut a lot of that out?
Oh, I remember it like it was yesterday because I loved this person. I loved my big brother, and he showed me a lot of affection. And of course, I that to me was like a drug, that love and attention. And the moment it happened, it was oral sex. He pulled me towards him, and as a little girl, I'm thinking, well, we were just playing and tickling and having fun, and now what is this you're doing? This does not feel right. I felt broken. I could feel my spirit, my wholeness just being shattered at that moment.
Wow.
But I loved this person. I loved my brother, but I hated my abuser. I had to separate them.
I think, we're going to have to come back to this later on because I want to stay in kind of the age order, but I imagine that would have affected you in terms of like confusing you in terms of your sexuality and whether you enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it, and like so many things.
Well, I had no language for it. I didn't know what it was. And but he's my brother. He loves me. And so it must be okay.
And did you shut this down at some point, like in your 20s, or was it always something that you thought about every day? Did you ever talk about it with family, or was it kind of put it away in your mind?
I put it away because I felt as a child, I loved my brother. Again, I had to separate my brother from the abuser. And my family, when we got together, I pretended like we were the happy family. I had to. And it's a lot of responsibility for a child to have that. If I tell on him, he's going to get in trouble. If I tell on him and he gets in trouble, he's going to get mad at me. There's a whole just a dichotomy there that it's really confusing for a child, and it's a lot of responsibility for a child. I'm going to break up my family if I say something. I want it to stop, but what do you do?
Well, and I imagine after you know, at 4, 5, 6, you can't make those decisions. But once you got to 12, 13, 15, you start to understand it more in terms of people are talking about it at school. There's sex education. And I imagine then a whole lot of other shame comes in. Why didn't I tell? It's too late. Like, if I tell now, are they going to think it's my fault? Like, it would shift over the years, I imagine.
Well, I'm a few years older than you. We weren't talking about this back then when I was in school. I mean, now we have Erin's Law, if you know Erin Marin, and we are talking about it and helping young kids. We weren't talking about this. I thought I was the only one. And since I've come out of the closet, per se, I have a lot of girlfriends from high school, junior high, that are coming up and saying, me too. But at that time, I thought I was the only one. I thought this was only happening to me. And I felt very damaged.
And even in terms of now, like you were sharing with me just before we jumped online, that you have had people say to you, you know, you talk about it too much, you know, because obviously you're a speaker and this is part of the work that you do. So you still feel like we have that shaming culture that tells survivors not to share.
Well, I became a speaking coach, and because I was finding my voice. So I was learning about public speaking, and I decided to teach public speaking too, because I was sort of shamed into that. I wanted to share my story, but people are saying, well, you know, you talk too much about it, you're going to ruin your business, and people don't want to hear about this. Well, people need to hear about this. We have to stop it. So people, you know, they may be well intended, but I call it unconscious bullying when they shame us into being silent.
And why do you believe sharing, because you use this line, if healing begins by telling, then we must make it safe to tell, which
Absolutely.
I thought was just beautiful. So
Thank you.
Why do you believe that healing begins with telling?
Because, well, they say your secrets make you sick. Well, mine was almost lethal. And it's because I held it in, and I held it in for years, and I became suicidal. And so watching Oprah and just watching the shows back, you know, when they started talking about sexual abuse, and then Oprah sharing her incest and how she's been successful, I saw that maybe I do need to talk about this. And so healing, I think, is the first step, but that's just it. We need to make it safe to tell. Because when I've told people, I had a friend, we're no longer friends, but she said, why don't you just get over it already? Well, I was starting the healing process, and then she said that to me. Well, a month later, she found out her husband was having an affair, and I could have very well said, well, why don't you just get over it already? But that's not what she needed from me. She needed me to listen without interruption or judgment, and that's what victims, survivors, we need that from family and loved ones. We need to speak, and we're not asking you to fix it.
Well, and that, you know, there's a whole conversation there. Like, even with my diagnosis with herpes, I say to people, like, there's a big warning label. Like, I agree. You're only as sick as your secrets. I think that this does a huge amount of damage, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. We're going to jump around. There's so many juicy pieces here in this to talk about. But, you know, if you have to be discerning, because when we're broken, sometimes we're not discerning with who we tell that feels safe. And everyone else is broken, and you can be a huge trigger for them. So you're sharing this kind of stuff. Like, I've had people who have cancer who say, man, you really learn who's there for you then. But I say, don't judge them because they don't know how to be empathetic and compassionate. They don't have any idea how to do this, because you're shaking up all their stuff that they don't want to look at either. So I'm going to press pause there for a second. So I want to say, for anyone who's just tuning in, we are having this live conversation. So if you're watching live, you're able to comment, send emojis. We can see everything. We can talk with you. We can post some of your questions. We'll check in with them every now and then in the conversation. Feel free to share the video live to your wall now so that others can tune in. And Rena went through sexual abuse from age 4 by her older brother for 2 decades, and then was raped by a colleague in the workplace sexually harassed by her boss. And so it's the perfect time with this conversation around Me Too that's going on out there, for us to all have this conversation. So hashtag Me Too in the comments, and let us know as we're going along what you're resonating with, or if you have any questions. So Rena, you were just talking then about how in your generation previously there wasn't as much talking about it. And so for you, part of your healing was through someone like Oprah. It had a huge impact on you. And you mentioned before to me personally that you felt that she saved your life.
Absolutely. Watching the shows and seeing people come on her shows, back then it was Phil Donahue, Jesse Raphael, but Oprah was my hero. I watched her all the time, every day. But seeing her confess or admit to her incest and all the struggles that she went through, and I'm like, wow, maybe what happened to me is affecting me more than I realize. And because I was broken, I was beyond, I thought I was beyond repair. I was so broken. And I was just, falling from the sky out of control with drugs, alcohol, men, and I just was not happy.
So how did that look? Like if we were to see you in your 20s and to meet you, because I often think about this, I don't even know if I would recognize myself and my behaviors. It's just like another lifetime ago. What was she like? What sort of behavior was she engaging in?
Rena during the day, 8 to 5, loved my jobs. I had integrity. I went to work. I wanted to be successful. But after 5 o'clock, it was like Dr. Jekyll, Miss Hyde. It was when the darkness hit, I had to go. I had to do the drugs. I had to do the alcohol. I had to sleep around. But during the day, people had no idea because I put on this happy face. I put on this successful face. And everybody thought I was very happy, had it all together. I was traveling to the world, dating successful men. And I was successful financially, buying new cars. So on the outside, everything looks perfect. But on the inside, everything was dead.
And you mentioned that you felt that you had, you went through a period where there was sex addiction and drug addiction. And going back in terms of talking about, being molested by your older brother who you loved and respected, and at age 4 being introduced, and that was kind of where I was saying we'll come back to this later. So was there something in this sexual addiction that was connected to that experience of like almost seeking it again unconsciously, because it had been this is our formative years for anyone who's been through sexual abuse. And I know Shelley said thank you for being so courageous and sharing your story, Rena. Me too, starting at age 3. And so for anyone who has been sexually abused before age 7 or 8 in particular, that's when we're forming all of our values and ideals and everything in the world. So how do you feel it impacted you in that way?
It had a huge impact because I thought that's what love looked like. That to me was what love looked like, was to give men sex, then they would love me. I was so wrong because I was giving sex to the wrong men. But it's something I share in my book, His Puppet No More. An older brother, older than the one that was abusing me, he used to work night jobs, and he came back home to live with us. And I was playing one day, running around the house, and he put me in bed with him just to get me to take a nap. I was a little girl. I don't remember how old, maybe 8 or 10. And he just wanted to sleep. I love my brother, Butchie. But he cuddled up to me, and I laid there in the bed, just frozen in a ball, waiting for him to do something. And he never touched me. And the really sad part, I didn't think he loved me because he didn't try to have sex with me.
Wow.
And I told him that and my younger brother years ago, after I started into counseling. they fell to their knees and started crying. They had no idea. For years, I didn't think they loved me because they never tried to have sex with me.
Yeah.
That's how brainwashed that what he did to that little 4-year-old girl. That's what they do to us.
Yeah.
That's how I thought love what came packaged, was to give them sex.
How old was your brother when you were 4 and
He was
began?
15.
And do you know whether he had been abused or why, what happened that him as a 15-year-old thought this was normal?
I think so. He used to be in juvenile detention. And so I think my grandmother, she was very strange with him. We thought maybe it was her or her husband, or he was raped in juvenile detention. I don't know. There's still no excuse, no matter what happened to him, because this is one thing. I was so afraid to tell people that I was abused as a child because I thought they'd think I was a child abuser. And that's
Right.
yeah.
And I have a friend, he's in his late 50s and he was abused by his father. And there's a huge amount of guilt. He didn't tell anyone, and his father went on just recently in his late 50s. They found out 5 years ago that his father had been molesting other boys. He had so much guilt that he'd never gone and told anyone, but he honestly thought that it was just a father-son thing. He didn't think this was something he would do with other people. And what he's now since learned is that often they don't stop at one, it continues on, and there's multiple victims. And again, one of the other things he's learned is that there's this stigma that everyone assumes that if he's been abused, he would be abusing his own children. And so it's really hard. You can break that cycle and you can break that pattern. As you say, there is no excuse. But we were talking earlier about that at the same time, we have to have compassion for your brother and other, Weinstein, Matt Lauer, all these people that are coming out in this MeToo campaign. If we don't also have compassion for the victims, we don't stop the cycle, because helping the victims to be supported is one part of it and getting them out of human trafficking that. But if we don't stop the need and the desire by these perpetrators to commit these kind of crimes, and they estimate it's something like 1 billion men. There's 27 million enslaved, more than any other time in history, and this is not counting family sexual abuse and rape. This is in the human trafficking side. And that is, we're not talking about people going to a stripper or paying for a prostitute who you can say it was consensual, but there's still a lot of, gray area there. But we're talking violent rapes and crimes when clearly someone does not want it and they're being held against their will. That alone is close to, they think, something like 1 billion men. Now, we have a problem. We have a problem when we're raising boys and men who think that that is how you get sex or love as well. And so you and I were talking about this in terms of, if we shame and judge everybody who's committing these crimes, we don't allow any space for them to also speak their truth and get the healing that is necessary. So I want to hear a little bit about what you think on that.
I think it's necessary. We need to allow them, if we want that space to heal, if we want that space to be heard, they need their space to be heard and healed, because maybe their stories can stop other young men from coming up and doing what they're doing. That's what we could hope for, I think. So, telling my story, whenever I do, I have women and men come up and say that happened to me too. So the more, as survivors, if we use our voice, those who are perpetrators, if they can start using their voice, maybe we can find a way to have this epidemic stop. 1 billion men, that's an epidemic.
Yeah,
it's an epidemic worldwide. I mean,
even if we look at rape culture in colleges, it's 1 in 3, and that's just what's reported. It's probably double that. 1 in 3 girls are sexually abused by somebody that they know. 1 in 5 boys, and these are just the reported statistics. So most of them are probably very under. So there was a comment you made. Some research that you said untreated sexual abuse can have a devastating effect. The research shows that hiding this horrible truth causes chronic illness, devastating psychological, emotional, and sociological effects and that you woke up blind at 20. And so you've now been able to connect that a lot of, as you said, our secrets make us sick. I'm a big believer of that one too. So talk a little bit about that experience when you started to see this was physically manifesting because of the decades of hiding and holding on to all this shame.
Yeah, holding it in. I was going through a bad relationship. I was in an abusive relationship. That's what you do. You gravitate towards abusive men. But everything was just falling from under me. And one morning I woke up and I couldn't see. I mean, I could see, lights and colors, but everything was black and gray. And I just started freaking out. I immediately called an eye doctor and I went and had my eyes checked. And I've never worn glasses but until I turned 40. But before that time, no glasses. And he checked me and he came from around the machine and looked at me straight in my eyes. And he grabbed my hand and he says, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're at the wrong doctor. Your eyesight is 2015. And I couldn't see his face. It was all a blur. And I just broke down. He gave me a prescription of Librium and I went and got it filled, but I ended up in the hospital. I was literally having a physical and a mental breakdown. It was because I held it all in. I have a story about a friend that I hired to help me design the book. My book cover is Puppet No More. And he was so excited that he shared the story with his mother that he was designing this book and I was a survivor of incest. And his 70-year-old mother started crying and said, that happened to me too. It was my uncle's and I've never told anybody. And he was devastated. He didn't know what to do. And so the next time I talked to him, I asked about his mother because he told me the story. And after she told him, she had the courage to tell her family doctor that had been treating her migraines for years with morphine pills. After she shared her truth with her son and then her doctor, today at 86, she's smiling a lot more and her migraines have almost but disappeared.
Wow.
She doesn't take any migraine medicine.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know if you've read it. There's a book called When the Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't read it, but I've heard about it.
I think I think everyone should read it. It should be recommended reading because no matter what's happened to you in your life, at some point you retain something as a type of trauma. It doesn't have to have been child abuse or sexual abuse, but it is the most prolific work on from a therapeutic point of view and psychological point of view of what goes on in the body with PTSD and trauma. So Your book, Puppet No More, what does the title mean? I love it. In terms of choosing that language of puppet or the mask, I assume.
His puppet no more. Well, I felt like his puppet because what he told me to do, I would do. When I became a young teenager and started dating, if he didn't like of course he had to pretend and let me date because he was married at that time.
Wow. So this continued after he got married.
Oh, yes. After he got married. And
wow.
If he didn't like the young man that I was dating, he would shame him and bully him in front of everybody. And I would break up with him. And
so none of your family picked up on this? Nobody sensed anything all these evenings he's sneaking into your room or he's married?
Well, it wasn't in the evening. It was my mother was a widow and she was 3 young children and he was older. The other 2 oldest children were out married. And so he was the protector of his little siblings.
Right.
And so mom would have to go to work full time and she thought he was at home taking care of us, protecting us.
So this wasn't just you?
Well, my younger sister did not admit to it, but I think she was always jealous of me and my younger brother because my brother would pick me up from school on his motorcycle and he would take me on trips. He would buy me gifts. He would give me money.
Now know is grooming.
was grooming and keeping me silent. But of course, my younger brother and sister saw this as Rena's getting preferential treatment.
Right.
And they were so jealous. And then years later, when I, came out and told them what was happening, they saw now that he was taking me off and doing these things to me.
Right. So interesting. So there's a warning for anyone who's seeing this dynamic of how it can look on the outside versus what's going on. And especially with that age difference that, looking at what's appropriate and what's not. So how has that experience been of, you're obviously like me, being a speaker, you had to speak your truth and speak it in a public way. It's hard enough for people to come out about incest within their own family and letting them know what's gone on, but to share it publicly can cause a lot of upset and hurt for the rest of the family. What's been the hardest thing about living in your truth publicly?
Well, with the family, I have to say, when I told my family, I was living in Florida and originally from Kansas City, and I called them and I told them, and they listened without interruption or judgment. They didn't shame, blame, pity, or shut me up. They let me speak my truth, and my family encouraged me to get help. And that was so cool because when I went into this group counseling, some of the other women did not have the same response. They were blamed or shamed. They were blamed for their stepfathers, fathers doing this. And a lot of them were kicked out of the house while the perpetrator remained in the home, which was so sad. So I had a very loving experience when I told my truth. And I didn't care at that point if it broke up the family because I was literally suicidal. But then I knew that I didn't want to die. I just didn't know how to live. And I called a crisis hotline. I had to.
And you mentioned that you felt like you were too ashamed to ask for help, and that's how you got to that place of being suicidal.
Yes.
What was that about, like the shame of asking for help? What was the feeling energetically? What was going on for you that you felt like you were bad instead of he was bad?
From, my mom's era, World War II, they shoved things under the rug. They didn't talk about things. They didn't put your business out in the street like a tabloid, like we talk about things today. And so I was taught that asking for help was a weakness, which I now know it's not, because the man that answered the hotline that night or that morning, he was kind and calming and gentle. And he listened without interruption or judgment. And he congratulated me on my courage. And I thought, he's my hero. And it was the first time that I felt a little bit proud of myself, that I did something, because he made me feel strong and courageous, that calling for help was a good thing. So he helped me reframe my beliefs on asking for help. And that's one of the things I talk about with the Thrive perspective and my Praise Approach program too.
I want to come back to that because you mentioned some great stuff around Thrive. So how did you start, when you mentioned that, you'd gone blind, you had this nervous breakdown, it was starting to manifest these secrets and sickness. And like you shared with the other example of the lady with the migraines, I think that it's so profound, the healing that can happen, but also just how we can, we're quite magical, crazy creatures in the way that our brains can shut down, compartmentalize, the ways that our body won't let us forget it, even if we think that we can shut this stuff down. And we think, I also come from a family that likes to come, that generation of, don't air your dirty laundry and why do you need to do this kind of healing and delve into things. But I believe, like you have shared, that this stuff has a way of not allowing us to move on. And I think that that's part of what our soul's contracts are, that we come here to do this work, and it's going to keep whispering and tapping and nudging you until you get to a place where you're willing to do the work. And for many of us, it's some kind of, whether it's that rock bottom moment in terms of addiction and numbing, and you get to a place where there's so much dysfunction that you are going to kill yourself and it's a slow suicide, or there's some kind of health crisis and disease in the body of cancer, addiction, all sorts of things that we're seeing with people nowadays more than ever. And for you, it was going blind and having that nervous breakdown. When you got to that place of being cracked open, that you have no choice, you're either going to kill yourself or you're going to have to share this with people and speak your truth. What was that transition moment like? What started to happen in your world?
When I started doing the healing, I just knew that the first time he touched me, I think I told you, I felt broken. I felt shattered. I felt my spirit just being shattered into a million pieces. And when I started healing, I could feel my soul, my spirit, me as a person becoming whole. I mean, my whole life I felt disjointed. And it was very miraculous that one day I was so depressed, I couldn't understand. I had one of the ladies in group said, when are you going to stop playing the victim and take responsibility for your life? And I'm like, what do you mean? I am the victim. What are you talking about? I was so depressed. I didn't want to go back to group. And the day before, I was so depressed. And it was like the spiritual awakening that the clouds of depression that had hovered over me for years just parted like the Red Sea. And I'm not a very religious person. I'm a spiritual person. But it was like the hand of God slapped me and said, snap out of it, Rena. And for that moment, I'm like, I get it. I can't change what happened to me, but I can change how it's in control of me. And I have to accept the good, the bad, and the ugly of everything that happened to me in order for me to move forward.
Preach.
I had to accept it all.
Yeah. And that, I think, I want to talk about that because, so for someone out there who hasn't done the work and has locked it tight and is starting to maybe have it manifest physically or show up in other ways in their life, I think that their biggest fear is feeling all of this. They feel that this will kill them. They fear doing the work, looking at this stuff. Like, it's absolutely terrifying to open that Pandora's box.
And it is. And what I want to tell them, it is so worth it. See, a lot of people and some of the women in my group, they suppress the memories. I didn't suppress the memories. I suppressed the pain. So going through 2 years of this group therapy, the pain had to come out. It's because I suppressed it for so many years. The pain was coming out going blind. The pain was coming out having a bladder infection, kidney infections, which put me in the hospital. I mean, I was just physically falling apart. So, dealing with that, I had to let it out. If you don't, it's going to kill you. It's going to manifest in one way or the other.
And I think that that's the choice when I'm talking about that breakdown moment that occurs, it's almost like it gets to a place where which is worse. And you kind of go, well, I'm going to have to start feeling this because I'm dying anyway. And
I was determined to get fixed because I was so broken and I was so tired. I went on Oprah because I was so tired of being ashamed of a crime that I did not commit. And I'm sick of being angry.
Yeah.
And I was determined to get fixed. I was determined to fix what they broke. So something was pushing me.
What is that that process like? That first 6 months when you're reliving the memories, reliving the pain, really looking at stuff that you've done a very good job of hiding from and locking away. What is that process like?
It's difficult. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie to you, your followers, mine. It was very difficult, but once you're determined to do something, I don't know where it comes from, but you're going to do it. I went to group every week, and then the next day I would go to work and all smiles, and then that night I would go home and cry and lock myself away. I read books. I talked to people. I talked to my therapist. I worked, I did the work. I had to do the work. I'm not going to lie to people. It takes work, but it is so worth it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is so
And I
worth
would
it.
say, you know, in all of the inner work that I've done, there can be this feeling of erratic mania, highs and lows, depression, and being joyful and then being sad. And it can be a really traumatic process for our souls to go
Very
back
traumatic.
and feel all sorts of stuff and to look at ourselves. And you can feel a little bit detached and disconnected from yourself and not know if something's right or wrong. But I agree, some kind of higher power, inner self guide knows that you're ready and you're okay and you're safe, but you need those support networks to do that deep work. You need to know that you have the books and the guides and the mentors and whatever's going to get you through, the support groups, the therapist, you know, just support yourself. So you were talking about how a lot of times people will use this language of not letting your past define you, and you actually think that we need to let our past define us so that we can thrive. So tell me a little bit about that philosophy.
Well, to me, when people say, "Don't," oh, you poor thing, just don't let your past define you. To me, that just perpetuates the shame of a crime that I didn't commit. But on the other hand, they're not sure what to say, which Dr. Brene Brown calls that uncomfortable sympathy. When you say something shocking like, I was sexually abused as a child, and they say, well, oh, you poor thing, you know, don't let you. Yeah. And that's understandable because, you know, they don't expect Rena to say, oh, I was sexually abused because I'm just happy-go-lucky, smiley girl. And so, but when I started studying the survival traits, you know, it highlights courage, tenacity, perseverance, resilience, and those are the survival traits, successful traits of survivors. And so I think we look at it all wrong, that our past, we're looking at our past, the shameful part of it. I didn't commit the crime. Why the hell should I be ashamed anymore? I'm sick of being ashamed. I'm looking at what it took to put on that happy face, to not let people know what I was going through. Right? So I'm looking at, you know, I want to help people focus on their strengths, the ones that they use to help them persevere during and after whatever they've experienced. Because that is what we need to concentrate on. Because you survived it. You put on a happy face, you kept going, you went to school, you went to work, whatever you did, you kept going. Yeah, I tried to numb it with drugs. Yes, I tried to numb it with sex and alcohol, but I kept going.
There's so many things we do. Yeah, you kept going.
And I kept going. And that is the good part. I want people to focus on, damn, I lived through all that.
Champion.
And I'm here. Yes. Yeah. Hey, we have climbed our own Mount Everest.
Yeah. Yeah. You deserve a medal more than anybody else who's climbed it, let me tell you.
Hello.
Now, for someone who is stuck in the, you know, not ready to do the healing, what would you say to inspire them in terms of how this feels? Because I often think my 20-year journey of shame and hiding my truth, I wish I could tell her how good it was going to feel to be through the other side, because you're so scared of doing this work and this healing and this feeling. But honestly, like, yes, it's brutal and it's traumatic and it's rough, but it's also beautiful, and you become this butterfly on the other side of it. So what would you say to inspire people in terms of how great this feels to be through it?
It's life-changing. You know, like I said, when I started doing the healing, I could feel my spirit coming together as one, as whole. And it's a very profound feeling when I knew that I hugged that little girl and told her it was okay and I had to let her go. I want to tell, if you're going through this, if you haven't told anybody, if you've told a few, if you haven't started the healing, start reading books, go to YouTube, go look at anything that you can, read books, find a therapist, There are therapists online if you're afraid to go see them in person. And here's one thing I'd like to tell people. I went through a couple of therapists. I wasn't comfortable with the first two until I found the group. If you're not comfortable with somebody, move on, because it's your life. It's your healing.
I love that.
Just start reading, reach out to people, find someone safe to tell that you think is safe to tell.
Start there, find someone safe to tell, get the resources. I love all of that. And so what do you think is important about this Me Too movement?
It's giving courage to those who haven't had the courage, who wanted to say Me Too for years. And now I think the internet is giving us a safe place to say Me Too more than we've had in the past. It's opening up, it's helping people feel safe, because we can shut off the internet.
They're seeing the stories too.
Oh yeah, seeing the stories.
I sat next to a lady at an event. I was invited to a book reading, and it was rape and incest survivors in the room. And this one particular lady who was next to me, she was maybe 40, and in the break, she turned to me, and one of the lady who was actually doing the reading at the time was someone who I had on my show. And she had been molested by her father from about age 5, and an incest survivor. And this lady turned to me with tears in her eyes, and she said, I've never met anyone or heard from anybody else who went through what I did. And I just remembered feeling so sad for her that it had taken until 40 for her to be able to connect with somebody else who had been through what she had. And that's why I started my show, because I really wanted people to be able to have that Me Too experience and know that whether it's addiction or herpes or depression or rape or trauma, we all have universal stories, and there's always someone else who can say Me Too. So yeah, I'm really just inspired and excited to see where this Me Too movement goes from here. And I think that there's still so much work to do. And as I said to you earlier, I think that, that shaming the shamers and attacking the perpetrators of crimes is something that we have to also look at and go, they have a Me Too story too, and how do we help them to rehabilitate and have compassion so that we can all change and grow going forwards, because ultimately what we want is to stop this so that nobody else ever has to experience it.
Exactly. I mean, if you and I make it safe to tell now, to me, future generations will be spared from having these atrocities to share, these stories to share. And not just children, but, anyone who has suffered rape, sexual harassment. What really bugs me? Sexual misconduct. I just hate that, because if you've never been sexually harassed, sexual harassment, rape, and incest is torture. It's not sexual misconduct. I just can't stand that.
Yeah.
But I guess that's an easy way for, a filtered way for them to put it out there on the internet. But at least it's being spoken about and being talked about now. It's torture, especially, it's not locker room talk.
Yeah. And I love that you made that comment on Facebook the other day. And so for anyone who has been watching and having this conversation with us tonight, I love, that you say that healing begins with telling, and that we must make it safe for people to tell. So if you haven't told, I hope that you will find one person that you feel safe to tell. Find a way to tell them. Maybe you send them this video. Maybe you send them a text or an email if you can't speak those words yet and they're stuck in your throat. Maybe you reach out to a therapist and you do it in a safe place for the first time. Maybe you journal it and write it for yourself. And, each of those things leads to the next step, and you don't have to figure out the entire journey and the entire healing, but grab a copy of Rena's book. She can post the comment in the comments, post a link for that, and we'll share it there. Reach out and look at resources, call a crisis helpline, do whatever you need to begin your healing work and just start those first steps. Rewatch this video. There was so much wisdom shared, and from there were so many things in those first 5 minutes that I just went, yes, this is like such beautiful wisdom drops. So rewatch the video. That in itself will be healing for you, to hear her Me Too story goes from her heart to your heart, and that is the beginning of the healing process. So I honor you for sharing your story and your truth and helping so many others by being courageous enough to talk about this, Rena. And thank you so much for being here with us tonight. So thank you guys. This is our last interview for the year, but we'll be back in January doing after the holidays every Tuesday, 7 p.m. PST. So stay tuned. YouTube, Kirsty TV, we have over 150 videos, and there's a playlist that shows you categories. So you can choose to look at the videos that are around abuse or trauma, around depression, around grief, around addiction. And they're like a library of tools and resources for you to begin doing this inner work and this healing. So please follow us, Kirsty TV, on YouTube, and subscribe. And on Facebook, you'll see these videos. Share this video with somebody who you know that this will help. And Rena, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. Mwah. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.